Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to provide you with another urgent update on the rapidly escalating war in Iran because the situation is now becoming more dangerous on a daily basis. The United States has continued its bombing campaign against Iran. Iran continues to retaliate against American military bases and interests across the Middle East. American military personnel have already been killed, hundreds more have been injured, and the cycle of attack and retaliation is showing no sign of slowing down. Ships and oil tankers continue to come under attack in and around the Strait of Hormuz. Traffic through one of the most important energy corridors in the world has fallen dramatically, and now the conflict appears to be opening up on an entirely new front. The Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen have declared what they describe as a naval blockade of Saudi Arabia. That's an extremely significant and potentially very dangerous escalation. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest oil exporters, and the Houthis are now threatening vessels travelling through the Bab el-Mandab Strait, the narrow gateway linking the Red Sea with the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. So we're no longer simply talking about Iran disrupting shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. We are now facing the possibility that two of the world's most important maritime routes for oil and global trade could be disrupted simultaneously. Hormuz to the east, the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandab to the west, and Saudi Arabia sitting directly in the middle. That threatens not only Saudi Arabian exports, but also global shipping, energy supplies, insurance costs, freight rates, and ultimately inflation across the world. Rather than moving towards peace, the conflict is spreading geographically, drawing in more countries, more armed groups, an ever larger share of the global economy. There has reportedly been some diplomatic activity and proposals for a temporary ceasefire, but there is no ceasefire currently in place. There's no meaningful de-escalation, the bombing is continuing, as is the retaliation, and every new attack simply creates a justification for another one. This is looking increasingly like a prolonged regional war, and that's extremely bad news for the global economy. Now, before we get into the details today, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? It really does help me with the algorithm and puts a smile on my face. If you could also give me a thumbs up for this video, and if it's available to you, hit that hype button because that really helps to promote this video to a wider audience. So let's begin with the latest military developments. The United States has now carried out strikes against Iranian targets for 10 consecutive nights. However, despite the intensity of the bombing campaign, there is little evidence that Iran is backing down. Iran continues to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, it continues to target American military interests across the Middle East, and it continues to demonstrate that it can disrupt one of the world's most strategically important waterways. American military personnel have already lost lives during this conflict, and hundreds more have reportedly suffered injuries since operations intensified earlier this month. For Washington, every casualty increases the political pressure to respond. For Tehran, every new American strike reinforces its determination to retaliate, and that creates an increasingly dangerous cycle. Neither side wants to appear weak, neither side wants to step back. Each side believes increasing military pressure will eventually force the other to concede. So far, the exact opposite has happened. The conflict has widened. Iranian missiles and drones have targeted American facilities across the Middle East. Countries including Jordan, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Iraq have all found themselves caught up in the conflict either through direct attacks or hosting American military assets. The wider region is becoming increasingly unstable, but perhaps the biggest concern for the global economy remains shipping. The Strait of Hormuz has become an increasingly dangerous place for commercial vessels. Tankers have been damaged, merchant ships have come under attack, insurance costs have risen sharply, and many operators are now reluctant to enter the region at all. Recent shipping data suggests vessel movement through the Strait of Hormuz has fallen dramatically, not surprisingly. There are reportedly no LNG carriers or very large crude carriers making the transit during the last few days, and that's extraordinary because, as we've discussed before, around 1/5, 20% of globally traded oil and a significant proportion of LNG, similar number, passes through the strait on a daily basis. If that flow is disrupted for a prolonged period, the consequences for energy markets are enormous. However, the biggest new development since my last update is the involvement of the Houthis. The Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen have announced what they're describing as a naval blockade of Saudi Arabia. That dramatically increased the risks facing the region. Saudi Arabia has traditionally been viewed as one of the world's most reliable oil exporters. Even when Hormuz has faced disruption, Saudi Arabia has retained the ability to move oil across the kingdom via its east-west pipeline before exporting through the Red Sea. But if the Bab el-Mandab Strait is also threatened now, that alternative export route comes under pressure. In other words, the global oil market could potentially lose flexibility at precisely the moment it needs it most. This is why analysts are treating this announcement so seriously. Instead of one maritime choke point facing disruption, there are now potentially two. That raises the possibility of higher freight costs, longer shipping routes, more expensive insurance, greater delays, and ultimately higher energy prices. Brent crude has remained elevated during this latest escalation, reflecting growing concerns that energy supplies could tighten further if the conflict continues to expand. Markets continue to react to every military development because investors understand that even relatively small disruptions can have a disproportionate impact when global spare capacity is limited. If the conflict continues to intensify and both Hormuz and Bab el-Mandab become heavily restricted, many analysts believe that oil prices will move comfortably above $100 per barrel. That would feed directly into higher transport costs, higher manufacturing costs, more expensive food production, rising airline fares, and renewed inflationary pressure all across the world. And this comes at a particularly difficult time. The global economy is still dealing with the after effects of the war in Ukraine. Russian refining capacity has been repeatedly disrupted by Ukrainian drone attacks, and that's still going on. Global inventories of refined products remain relatively tight, and central banks are only just beginning to get inflation under control. Another sustained energy shock would therefore arrive at exactly the wrong moment. Higher oil prices don't just affect motorists, they affect almost every product transported around the world, from plastics and chemicals to fertilizers, food, and consumer goods. Every stage of the supply chain becomes more expensive. Businesses either absorb the costs or pass them on to consumers, but either way, economic growth suffers and inflation rises. And central banks find themselves facing another extremely difficult balancing act. Although there have reportedly been tentative diplomatic efforts and discussions around a temporary ceasefire, there's absolutely no sign of that happening. The military campaign is continuing, it's actually getting worse. Retaliation is also happening, and neither Washington nor Tehran appears prepared to compromise. This is why the outlook for the remainder of 2026 remains so uncertain. The longer this conflict continues, the greater the risk that more countries become directly involved, the greater the risk of further attacks happening on shipping, and the greater the likelihood that the economic damage will spread all around the globe. This is no longer simply a regional conflict, it's becoming one of the defining risks for the global economy in 2026. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they occur, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that the Houthis are now stepping into this conflict, and we could have the closure of two really important transport routes, and that is going to have a really big impact on global prices and potentially the rest of the growth of 2026 for the global economy. So hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. I'm trying to get you thinking in different ways. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't like it but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hit that hype button if it's available to you. I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you for that support. I've had a couple of my patrons actually raise the issue recently of not posting these videos onto Patreon. Now, the reason why I've stopped doing that is because the Patreon system is really difficult to deal with. It's really slow and cumbersome. It takes a long time to upload the videos, and you can't upload the thumbnail at the same time. You have to do it once everything's finished. And quite often I'll be waiting for an hour or an hour and a half for it to upload. And then I go on to do other things, and then I forget to go back and put the thumbnail on. You can't post it without the thumbnail. So some days it was delayed by a day or two, and it was just becoming really tiresome. And also, not a lot of people were watching those videos on Patreon. probably around 15 to 20 people for each video. So it was a lot of work and effort for a small amount of views. So I took the difficult decision to stop uploading to Patreon. Not many people have raised it, but a few of my patrons have, and I really like to apologize if you're one of my patrons who does watch my videos on Patreon. I know it's advert free, so it's fantastic for you guys, but it was just becoming too difficult. And because of the volume of videos that I'm making, it was actually taking hours out of each day to try and do it, and it just became a real headache. So I've stopped doing that. I apologize. I understand if you want to cancel your Patreon contributions, fully understand that, because I just can't deliver on those Patreon videos anymore. So apologies if you're one of those patrons who's been affected by that, but just wanted to give you an update as to why that's happened.